Howard Gardner Charter School achieved 95% paperless procurement with ProcureDesk. Before this, everything was a simple form that needs to be printed. You need to fill it in, walk it through 3 or 4 approvals. By the time something gets approved in order, it might be a week. And in this video, I'm going to break down exact step-by-step process on how we help them so that you can follow the exact same process to go paperless yourself. Let's dive in. So let's see, first of all, why paper-based process breaks down. So when we started working with them, we of course realized everything was paper, and then there were multiple steps in that. As their CEO Joe Ross mentioned, their systems were antiquated and slow. So let's break down in terms of what the exact process was and why it was slow. So first of all, if you have a paper-based process, it just has to be printed, signed. Maybe you're scanning it, putting it back in your review or approval process, or you're physically walking down to somebody's office to get approval and so on. Now imagine it comes to a lot of problems, right? So if people are out, it's stuck. If somebody's busy, they might just have a stack of papers they have to go through, review, and so on, right? Or in today's world, everybody's remote. Again, that caused a lot of problems. So when we specifically look at their process, right? If I'm a staff member, I have to go and print something to get an approval. I'll fill that in. I'll go to my manager or, staff manager to kind of get approval. And once the approval is done, I need to go to business manager, John Marsico, for getting the approval. Once John approves it, it needs to go to a buyer who then needs to actually place the order. If you kind of visualize people walking through from one office to another, you might have like a stack of papers and sitting in somebody's queue, and everybody have a day job, right? It's just not their job just to review and approve and move to the next step. So it can easily bottleneck when you have 3 or 4 approvals because one person is out of office or they're busy, the whole requisition process stops. And that's exactly what was happening here, right? John Marsico, who's a business manager, had a stack of paper sitting in his office. And when we were talking to Dennis, who is a facility manager, kind of mentioned is that John might have a stack of paper sitting there and it might take some time for him to get through that because, he's busy doing other work. And because of that, sometimes the whole process might take a week while the staff is waiting for the supplies or the material they need to kind of run the operation. So that was kind of one problem. The second problem was they had to enter the same information in multiple systems, right? They were using QuickBooks. Now we have a form which is signed. You have like some sort of audit trail on who signed and when it was signed and so on. Now imagine taking all this information and putting into QuickBooks. Not only it is time taking, right? Because you're doing the double entry or data entry, but it could also lead to errors or human error. When somebody's entering the data, they might enter the wrong information. They might code it to the wrong GL and so on. All this can happen when you have a manual process. And because of which the business manager was actually not able to focus on playing the role of business manager, approving requisitions and trying to speeding up the whole process became a full-time job. So a year back, they started looking into a procurement solution. John, along with the IT director, Matt Schneider, looked at possible solutions, doing full evaluation and so on, looking at different options. They chose ProcureDesk to simplify the procurement process. Here were some of the things which they told us were important to them while doing the selection, right? So number one is they wanted a system that was integrated with QuickBooks. So they are not entering the same information again and again. Just because ProcureDesk integrates seamlessly with QuickBooks, that was a no-brainer. Number two is they wanted something that was easy for the staff to adopt. In our experience, procurement system doesn't fail in terms of because people don't want to use it. The problem is that the systems are very complex. And if the system is complex and people don't adopt, they will end up picking up either a alternate process or going outside the system to do what they're supposed to do to kind of, make purchasing. So one of the things which we did was working with the staff was to make sure we set up the right punch outs, like with Amazon and others, to make sure it's easy for employees to kind of follow. So we'll talk about implementation in a minute. By the way, if you're dealing with a paper-based process and you're looking to automate, or you are just curious how this can be automated, click on the link below and talk to one of our product specialists. They will walk you exactly how we'll transition you from a paper-based process to a fully automated process. Let's look at implementation process, what they went through to make sure that the system is fully adopted. As John Marsico described, the process was pretty seamless. They went through a phased approach rather than rolling out to all the teachers and staff. They kind of went through a initial rollout to make sure they test the system or dry run the system, run through the whole process, reduce any sort of kinks, and then roll it out to the entire organization. So let's break it down in terms of the steps they kind of went through so you can can relate to what you need to do as well. So number one was we set up their approval workflows. So we worked with them to define exactly how an approval needs to happen. What are the different thresholds they have in the process today, right? In terms of, when it needs to go to a business manager, does it always go to a business manager? When does it need to go to the CEO for approval based on the approval thresholds and so on? What kind of self-approval limits are required? We worked with them to set all that up. Number two was we set up the integration with QuickBooks to make sure that the data integrates seamlessly. They already had a lot of chart of accounts, their classes that they needed in ProcureDesk so that expenses can be mapped to the right chart of account and class. So we pulled all that information into ProcureDesk, made sure that the data goes back seamlessly after the PO is approved, including the matching of the invoices with purchase orders. And once the invoice is reviewed and approved, it was sent to the accounting system, in this case, QuickBooks, automatically. Right? So that's number two. Number three is we work with them to ensure that all their major vendors are configured in ProcureDesk. We mentioned this before, but if you think about the experience that employees have when they're using the system, you don't want them to change that experience. So most of their staff members were used to going to like an Amazon to place an order. So what we did was we integrated Amazon within ProcureDesk. Now Amazon sits as a tile or a logo in ProcureDesk. You click on it, it takes you to the website, you pick what you need, and it brings you back. There's no need for, let me go take a link, copy the description, put it back in the manual form. All that is gone. So we looked at their top vendors and worked with them to ensure that they are configured in ProcureDesk. And number four, what we did was to ensure that there's smooth transition. We kind of set up the system that first you can do like a dry run or a sandbox testing where you test the whole system, make sure it is kind of set up the way you want it, and then migrate it to the production when we kind of launch the system to all the staff members. And this is very critical. I want to state it one more time, is you want to make sure that when you are launching it to something like this, which, the staff is not used to, like you're launching a new system, always do a dry run with key staff members to make sure that all the kinks are removed. You have taken their feedback and then that is implemented in the kind of ongoing process. All right, so let's look at now some of the results that they achieved due to this process. Number one was their approval cycle time went down from a week to a couple of hours. Like when we were talking to John Marsico on what the approval cycle looks like, he said now, even if I have 15 or 20 requisitions sitting in my queue, I can go through easily in less than 20 minutes. And the same process used to take weeks for me because, I gotta get the paper, make sure it's right, all the documentation is right, and so on. Now the staff members go in, put in the request. It is already tied to the budget. I can review everything. Everything is connected in terms of supporting documents. All information is one place. Simply review, click, approve, done. So that's number one. Number two is we reduced their paper-based process to fully automated to 95%. They still have onesie, twosies, paper-based process where they are looking to kind of further implement, but now everything is paperless. So the benefit of going paperless, of course, it is fully automated. It is more structured. It reduces the time for everybody. But more important is it saves time and space. So what I mean by that is if you have a paper-based process, you got to take printouts. And for audit reasons, you need to put them in the boxes. So when auditors comes, most of the organization have a statute limitation of 7 years. So imagine keeping all those boxes and the space that it occupies. All that is gone. And of course, you're saving costs because you're not printing, so you're saving on the printing cost as well, right? So those are kind of the, I would say, secondary benefits of automating the procurement process. And the third was the simplified experience using Amazon. When we were talking to Dennis, who's a facility manager, he kind of said before that we have to go to different sites, pick what we want to buy, put that in the system. Sometimes the information is wrong. By the time the request is approved, pricing have changed, and that could lead to delays in the process. And now it's just pretty easy. Go to the system, click on Amazon, pick what you want to buy, bring it back, and that's it. So that's how simplified the process is from Amazon's standpoint. And also the rest of the notifications are simplified, right? So once you place the order, you get a notification, your order has been placed and approved. Once it is shipped, you get a notification that it has been shipped. It's pretty smooth for employees to follow what is going on with the process. So now let's look at the impact on the staff, right? So we want to just kind of, when you're considering these implementations, it doesn't just affect the finance team, it affects the entire organization. So we'll kind of go through step by step, right? So number one was now for business manager, John Marsico. John can actually now focus on doing the role of business manager. Before that, he didn't have time playing the role of business manager, which is reviewing the budgets, reviewing the compliance to the budgets, looking at the trend analysis and so on, right? Where are the variations and things like that. Now he can spend more time on those value value-added activities rather than chasing people for approvals or manually signing requisition forms. The second impact was on the rest of the staff, right? So Trisha William, who's in the finance office, was responsible for placing the orders. I mentioned that now teachers have a very easy way to go and place orders for whatever they need to purchase. So that the whole impact of this is that the staff doesn't have to worry about chasing orders. They can focus on the mission, which is to educate kids, right? So it opens up a lot of time and focus on the things they should be doing. And not only that, now the school is thinking about what's next, right? How do we enhance the process much more? How do we go 100%, fully paperless? But also, how do we add more vendors in the punch-out process so it further expands the scope and makes the process further seamless for the rest of the employees? So if your organization or your charter school is running on paper forms and paper approvals and so on, and you want to know how you can fully automate your process, click on the link below to schedule a time with one of our product specialists. We'll walk you through how it integrates and how it will take you from a paper-based process to fully paperless procurement process within a span of 2 to 3 weeks. Again, click on the link below to schedule a demo. Now, if you want to see how you can implement purchasing controls in your company, click on this link.